Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, bringing the rescue boat to your sales challenges. In this ever-changing sales environment, it's easy for leaders to feel adrift. We're here to be the beacon guiding you to success. Each episode, I'm joined by top sales experts and practitioners who have navigated this waters and come out victorious. Together, we'll uncover the insights and strategies that will help you hit your sales targets and grow your business. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Welcome to this session of your Sales SOS podcast, your sales podcast crew today, Daryl Prale, Mike Simmons, Chris Bowen, Renee Bigelow, and Bryn Tillman. And I'm Liz Hyman. And we're going to talk about mistakes because it's so much fun for us to talk about it, but I think it's so much more revealing for you when you're listening. So let's talk about sales leadership and sales management because we've been talking about both. And let's talk about what are some of the biggest mistakes? What do they sound like? What do they look like? What happens when you do them? So what are some of the biggest mistakes that sales leaders are making out there in the world today?
They're missing their numbers. I'm sorry, that's not a mistake. Shut up.
Daryl, they're missing their numbers.
Yeah.
And if they were really great sales managers, they'd probably be hitting their numbers. So Daryl, why aren't they hitting their numbers?
Oh my God, how much time do we have? Okay, so there's lots of reasons why they're not hitting the numbers. This is now becoming a therapy session for me. This may or not be factual, but I'll feel better when I'm done. The biggest reason they're missing their numbers isn't skill, isn't people communication, isn't systems. All of those are huge. We're going to talk about them. I find the biggest reason they're missing numbers is because too many people who do not understand sales are the ones making the targets that are based on nothing but bullshit and their finger in the wind. And then they expect the sales team and by extension, marketing as well to make it happen. So
okay, so Mike almost fell off his seat laughing. Can we just say that again? You cannot pull numbers from thin air and then get mad at your sales team for not hitting those numbers.
Yes. Now,
this is, I call wagging your sales team. Let's make a wild ass
dog,
guess.
Right? Yes.
And then get mad.
The issue there, though, it goes both ways, is that sales leadership needs to insert themselves hard, strong, and fast into that process so that the numbers that are ultimately settled on are owned. So it's a two-way street, but that's what I see company after company after company. And, that's a big reason why they're missing it. That's just really, really high level. I know Renee's going to go.
But sales leaders who are good sales leaders are not sitting there quietly when those unrealistic sales goals get handed down. So sales leaders, the mistake is not saying we cannot do that in this market. We cannot do that with the resources allocated. We cannot do that unless, right? So it's our job as sales leaders to make it clear what is required to hit that number.
And
Mike, go ahead, Daryl.
I want to echo Renee here. The sales leaders need to be, and when I echo Renee, because the podcast has just started. Previous podcasts, Renee was all about the CRM, and I am with her 1,000%, which means the sales leaders need to be as versed in the CRM and the data and the numbers and the history and everything that goes into making a forecast as the CFO is, so that they can actually insert themselves in that process and make valid arguments as opposed to huff and puff and, just try to out intimidate them.
Don't have the first time that you're having the conversation be at a leadership team meeting.
Oh, thank you. Bless you, brother.
Right. Have the conversation with the CFO before you all get into the meeting.
Right.
Come on, do your job as a salesperson, as a sales leader, and go do that work and kind of figure those things out. And one of the questions I like to ask is, how'd you get there? Show me the math. How'd that work?
Yeah.
Okay, what needs to be true in order to get there?
I cannot tell you how many times I've watched CEOs stumble when asked that question and then try to bluster their way through it, when the reality is the CEO is trying to keep their job because the board said that's not the way they want it, because the investors are looking to cash out.
Because somebody read a book.
We can't.
Somebody read a book that said your your quota should be 5x your OTE. So if we're going to pay our reps $250K at OTE, they should be generating $1 million in actually my numbers are wrong. So 200K OTE, $1 million. Simple math.
Oh, and by the way, we're going to cut marketing and then increase our sales goals.
Who's marketing? What do you mean? Marketing gets measured on MQLs.
Yes.
And what's an MQL? Does anybody even know what an MQL is?
Renee does.
I think these crazy numbers, not grounded in the market, right, are pretty typical. But there are two extremes that I usually see. There's the three. There's the wild ass guess, right? Like that happens. Like this is just what we think. We think this is kind of, fuzzy math. This is what we think. But the two extremes I see much more often are the larger the company and the more mature the company is, the more there are very sophisticated forecasting tools, market forecasting, things like that, where you really can zero in on whether or not you think it's going to be an up year, a down year, what's happening, and then come up with a plan to change it. On the other end of the spectrum, you have startup culture, which is simply, it's always 200x, right? Like that's startup math. It's always 200x. And that's not based on increasing an investment in marketing, adding more salespeople, anything else. It's just, that's your number, right? So I think it's important to know that those three areas are probably like more predominant in number settings. And when Daryl says people can't hit their numbers, understanding where these three weird sets of numbers are coming from, I think is very helpful.
What's even better is when you go hire the new VP of sales from Oracle and they come in with their numbers in this startup.
Yes. There's nothing like a leader from a dominant brand where 90% of the leads are inbound with zero selling coming in and telling us. I love when that happens.
I want, Apple spends X% of their total revenue on marketing. We only want to spend that percent. Okay. You're Apple, right?
Well, I several years ago when I was in-house, we kept running up against Monday.com as a competitor. And there was no way we could outmarket Monday.com. And it was just like I kept hitting my head up against a wall. They go to IPO, and in their disclosure, it's something like 120% of revenue that they're spending on marketing budget.
Yeah.
Right? You have to understand that you have to find some numbers that are relevant to your situation, to your team, whether if you don't have a lot of data because you're relatively new or you've changed your go-to-market, then you have to look to data in the market. You can use the BLS, you can use other information sources to get some sort of forecast on your market. There's a lot of things that you can do, but it needs to be a little bit more grounded in reality.
I had a similar experience in just sharing for the audience. You know where to go and look to argue, where we were a number 3 player in the space. I won't name names to protect the innocent, competing against the number 1 player, which was a public company. And everybody else in the space was just dying, not hitting their revenue numbers. But the number 1 player comes out and they got 160% or whatever of target. Look at us. So the argument from the investors was, your excuses are bullshit. Look at the number 1 person doing it. If they can do it, we can do it. When you actually looked at the numbers, you saw 95% of their revenue growth came from an install base, not new sales, the install base, which means we were way outperforming them on new sales. But our investors didn't want to hear that. Those were excuses. So that's why you need to be wise, guys. You need to drill down and be part of the numbers. You need to become best friends with the CFO. I'll say it again. I've said it before. You need to be best friends with the RevOps people so you can understand the data.
Yeah, it is very easy to fail alone. in these kind of conversations. Like you just go out there and you don't ask questions, you make assumptions and you run with things. And then all what you're doing is you're getting yourself into a situation where you've set up your business and you've set up your people and you've set up your customers for failure. And it is, I'll throw a number out. I hate venture capital. Absolutely despise the VC space, primarily because everybody in that group is measured by a certain rubric or a certain set of numbers, yet what percentage of them are actually successful? So we're going to go ahead and measure everybody off of this rubric, and our success rate is 1 out of 10 if we're really, really lucky that they get to a point where they do something interesting, and maybe 1 out of 100 that get to a point where they IPO. But we're all going to measure ourselves off the same metric. How does that make any sense? And Liz, you're muted.
Sorry, I had some craziness in the background here. It doesn't matter to them. To many VCs, they only care about the one. And so what we need to understand as leaders of companies and as sales leaders, that if we are part of a VC experience or enterprise, that their biggest concern is how fast can you grow and how much can we make when we flip. And so let's move away from that for a moment, because that's one version of business. And let's go into the other version of business, which is run by a group of people who are growing a company to continue and survive for the purpose of achieving whatever their mission is, whether it's, improving health or improving safety or having fun, whatever it is. Let's think more about those companies. And as leaders in those companies, what are the mistakes that we're making that are undermining our ability to achieve?
At which stage, Liz? Like, are we talking about the I've got a family-owned business that I've been operating for 20, maybe 30 years, and the kind of mistakes that would happen there? Or are we talking about something a little bit different? Like, where are you?
Like the mid-market firms.
Yeah, let's talk about mid-market to start.
I think one thing that I see pretty regularly in mid-market is when you want to see whether you're at a plateau or you're trying to scale to the next level, you're trying to get there, understanding what kind of investment you need to make in marketing or sales to get whatever that growth is that you want. And then secondly, what is the roadblock that's kept you from getting there before? I feel like there's a little bit of magical thinking and, okay, we're just going to grow. We're going to add a product, or we're going to add a distributor or another channel. And that'll be the answer to all of our problems. When there's a little mix of what's the roadblock that's kind of kept you there, if you do have a history like that, it's kept you from getting over that plateau, and what kind of investment do you think you need to make in order to get to that next level?
So I'm going to just stop for a second, because Mike asked in the chat, what's mid-market? And that really could be anything, right? So, we have SMB, this category. Small business is often privately held, small, $2, $3, $10 million. When we get into mid-market, we're often talking about companies that are 50 to say 200 million. And you could even go larger than that. So, when does it switch from mid-market to enterprise? Well, we could have this conversation for hours, but let's just kind of look at this sort of mid-size, often privately held business, and use that as our measure. Sorry, Renee.
No, I think that, I shared my point. I think you definitely clarified it well. I think that 25 to 50 million up to 200 to 500 million, it's a huge difference in the beginning of that scale and the end of that scale, but it's not Fortune 500 and it's not a small mom and pop, right? You're generally talking over 100 employees, definitely over 50, right? You're talking, usually at least 5 years of history. So you have some data, you have information, right? It's not your startup culture either.
Yeah. And one of the challenges you run into in that stage is you're starting to get to the point where you can have people inside the organization who can hide. At the smaller stage, you don't really have as many places to hide. Like everybody kind of does a little bit of everything else. And so you get into these bigger organizations and you start to um, people can hide. You start to specialize. You start to look at trying to create scale, and you also start to look at how do I both keep the business running and create a space for a lot of growth, take some risk. And as leaders, we try to, I've seen I've made mistakes in this area where you try to operate in the keep the business running area and try to do more innovative things in the keep the business running, where your innovative stuff should be over here in this let's test and not screw up the thing that actually keeps the lights on and keeps people fed and keeps people employed inside the organization. So there's this really crazy balance of stuff that happens, and you start bringing new people into the business. People start to get jobs taken away from them that they really like. Like, hey, I really like that I used to be able to go out and do marketing copy on a website on my own. And now in order to do it, I have to go talk to Renee before I push anything live. So there's all of this this is that whole tension that Liz was talking about early on, where it just is this messy agitation cycle inside an organization and across your people. A really cool space to operate in.
I think one of the things, sorry, Liz. I think one of the things that you have to look at there is also as you're getting larger and trying to move, you'll start to get a whole lot more people that become really, really interested in the data that's in your CRM and what information they would need in there in order for it to be more valuable for them. And then they're expecting your people to plug that information in and do all this other heavy lifting for them without an understanding of how that's really going to impact usage, adoption, the value of that data as it's getting input, because a lot of times it ends up being really, really bad data because the people putting it in don't understand what you're really looking for and why you need it and why it's important.
So when we were talking about CRMs in one of our earlier episodes, if it is not easy for the salespeople to use, if there are not a reasonable number of questions, they will not use it effectively, and then data will be worthless. So we have to remember that when we're setting up the CRM and we're engaging the whole organization in what they need, that we have to make sure that the salesperson isn't the data gatherer for the entire company.
Liz, can I just also add, because you and I have both seen this in clients we've worked with together, it also has to work for sales. It can't be a tool for another department, right? It can't be accounting's tool first, right? Like, it has to work for everybody, but if it doesn't work for sales, then the data will never make it in.
So from a sales leadership mistakes problem, one of the biggest problems is setting up the CRM poorly, letting other parts of the company drive what sales is allowed to do. One of my clients did not allow sales to add new companies without them being credit checked, right? What are you doing when you set up that CRM to undermine the success of the salespeople? And I want to go back for a second before we get too far into CRM. This idea of, as a sales leader, as a company leader, as a sales manager, when we're testing things out, how serious are we about testing them out? I have heard this over and over again from salespeople. Oh, we just wait until the CEO tells us for like the 6th time in a month that they want us to do something before we actually go ahead and make that change. Because every time we talk to them, they have some new exciting idea. And 2 weeks from now, they forget and tell us to do something else. So we've just stopped implementing all those crazy changes. So the CEO just assumes it didn't work. So let's try something else. And you can't, on a sales team, it's like kind of like an elephant. You can't just change direction quickly. You have to move them, and you can't just keep shifting back and forth. Try this, try that, do this. Oh, go back to this. Oh no, try this. It doesn't work. It's a really bad leadership.
You're bringing back a lot of scarring here, Liz. Way to go. I'm going to need some therapy. I have in my past worked with a CEO who was convinced they were the smartest person in the room. and literally change the strategy every 3 months. And when you call them on it, they instead project it back to say, no, you just don't understand. And it was never their fault. It was them. And when you drill down on it, you realize they're actually scrambling in response to pressure they're getting from the board, but they don't want to admit that because then they feel like they're going to come off as insecure or whatnot. And they have this self-image they're trying to project. That individual needs a whole lot of therapy. Unfortunately, that individual is very, very, very common. So this is where I'm going back one step. In a sales leadership role, if you're, senior in the ranks, if you're a CRO, a VP sales, what have you, you need to talk to the board, not just the CEO. They want to talk to you because you need to understand how to basically manage up so you can stop some of these things, such as constantly changing product roadmaps, go-to-market plans, forecast numbers. So welcome to the big boys and girls club. It's not about sales skills at this level. It's about how to manage expectations and get alignment and consensus.
And can I want to go back to why is leadership changing the plan every 3 months? Yeah. Why are they scrambling? Why are they frantic? And this goes back, Renee, I want to hear your thought. I have one thought, which is, do you understand the data in your CRM? Do you understand what your funnel needs to look like? Have you done the math that says we need this many MQLs, marketing qualified leads, we need this many SQLs, and we need them this far in advance? If you don't have some idea of what's going to happen 6 months from now, if you have a 6 or a 9 or a 12-month sales cycle, then you're always going to be scrambling. You will always be scrambling and making crazy decisions to make up for what you should have been thinking about 6 months ago. Renee and Bryn had something. I don't know who wants to go next.
I wanted to share because I think this is so apt here. And I read this last week in an article I was reading, and it's Cantor's Law. It's everything looks like failure in the middle.
Right.
And I think that's like when you say, why are we changing things every 3 months? And, so we're talking about strategies, this, and you have a sales team who's like, well, just wait, because it'll change again, right? Like everything looks like failure in the middle because you got to give it time. And especially if you're in something like B2B, you just assume your sales process is longer than you ever realize it is, because it's way longer than before your salesperson talks to that lead. That whole journey starts long before that, right? So a lot of times you need time to see how long it could take. If you have a 1-year customer journey, I'm not talking about your sales cycle now, I'm talking about your customer journey. When they start thinking about they want to solve a problem, when they start seeing what's out there, then evaluating different tools, whatever, right? That could easily be a 1 to 2 year timeline. And if you've made a change that's going to affect your top of funnel, you are not going to see that change for a while. So that this Cantor's Law, it was shared in Harvard Business Review. Everything looks like a failure in the middle was something I shared on LinkedIn. And I was like, I have to quote that a lot because I think it's something we all need to hear.
Bryn, what did you want to add?
So, so I want to kind of yes and this and say, from a salesperson's perspective on marketing, we need content that's much earlier in the sales journey to accomplish what everyone's talking about, what Renee is talking about. Right? We need to attract our buyers way before they know they need us. And so marketing has to do a really good job of identifying the entire buyer's cycle all the way back to the first the very first right? Why? When they start to Google a solution, we need to be the one that they're finding as early as possible. Corporate Visions, I think, did this study, if I got it wrong, and I think it was Corporate Visions, and 74% of buyers choose the sales reps that, 74% of buyers chose the company or sales rep that was first to provide value and insight. It's first, right? So how do we get there first? How are we enabling our buyers to see us as the thought leaders first? So I think a lot of that early decision making, that early, like way before we talk about our solution, we have to talk about their problem.
And I think that's all really important. I also want to go back to the way we measure things in the CRM. So when I ask a CEO, how long is your sales cycle? And they tell me 3 months for a business to business complex sale. What I know is that from the time they write the proposal or have come to agreement on what the proposal should be, it's 3 months. Because the way CRMs are set up, many companies haven't figured out how to measure the top of the funnel and what the true pipeline timeline, what the true sales process timeline really is. And if you tell me 3 months, I'm guessing it's a year. And I'm almost like, I can almost say 99% of the time, that's what I see. You tell me 3 months, it's a year. You tell me 6 months, it's probably 18 months. You tell me 6 weeks, it's probably 6 months. And that's even before, Renee, the top of the funnel, which is that what I call the engagement funnel, where they're learning about and thinking about our solution before they ever communicate with us.
Yeah. I mean, like most research will say somewhere between 75 and 90% of people have already narrowed down their choices before they ever speak with a salesperson now. Right. So that life cycle that you're talking about is far longer than what shows up in that. If you're just looking at from proposal to close, right? If you're just looking at that, it's just a small speck of that entire spectrum.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we're getting panicky, right? We think it's a 3-month sales cycle. There's not enough in the top of the funnel. Nobody's been looking at it. We don't really know what to measure. So we're just frantically trying to do things that are going to impact what happens 3 months from now. But we're 3, 6, 9 months too late to affect what's going to happen 3 months from now.
This is where I want to jump in and say, for all those sales leaders who are interviewing for a role, this is when you should be doing the math before you ever accept the role, because this is your one chance to set expectations. Because again, building what Liz says, it's not a 3-month cycle, it's a 9-month cycle. Or building what Renee said, it's going to look crappy in the middle. And do I have your commitment until the end? So don't be naive and excited about the opportunity. Do your due diligence, or you will pay the price and you will be miserable and you will leave within a year.
To add to that one,
yep.
A question to ask in that due diligence phase, what's the source of these deals? How does sales cycle change based on source? Because if your CEO, who is amazing at networking and has a great network and is the person who's leading sales, founder-led sales, and they've been able to do it and they just haven't been able to find the right sales reps to come in and sell the way that they do, then run. Run. Don't even stop. Don't be the first mistake that founder makes, unless you have a lot of patience, a lot of grit, and feel very comfortable being very direct.
And that's a wrap of this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope today's episode has equipped you to navigate the sales seas with confidence. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Sales SOS podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn. Until next time, keep sailing towards those sales goals. I'm Liz Hyman, your captain here at the Sales SOS podcast, saying smooth sailing and successful selling.